The Kalrith sliced through Earth's atmosphere like a predator, closing in on unsuspecting prey. Commander Karamzar stood at the observation deck, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the blue planet loom larger in the viewport. His violet eyes gleamed with anticipation. "Prepare for landing," Karamzar ordered, his voice cold and assured. The Kalrith, flagship of the Dorkin Dominion, had conquered dozens of worlds, subjugating species far more fearsome than humans. This campaign would be no different. Humans were primitive, fragile, lacking the technology to even traverse their own solar system. The commander had reviewed the records. Short lifespans, weak bodies, a propensity for infighting. In the galactic hierarchy, they were little more than animals. "Commander," one of the bridge officers called. "Landing zone secured. No resistance detected." Karamzar smirked. As expected, the rumors about humans being fierce fighters were amusing to him. Earth's other defenders, who had warned the Dominion to avoid this backwater planet, were likely clinging to exaggerated myths. If anything, this would be a test of patience, not skill. Karamzar descended from the deck, his black armor reflecting the dim lights of the ship. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Zivak, awaited him in the landing bay. "Are we ready, Lieutenant?" Karamzar asked, the cool confidence in his voice never wavering. Zivak nodded. "All ground units are prepped. Initial scans show no significant military presence. The humans don't seem to have realized we've landed." The commander's smirk widened. "Good. Let's see what all the fuss is about then." As the landing ramp lowered, the alien soldiers, tall, muscular beings with a bluish-gray complexion, stepped onto Earth's soil. They spread out across the quiet landscape, a small rural town barely visible in the distance. It was peaceful, serene even. Karamzar found it almost laughable. This would be over before it began. The soldiers moved with precision, systematically sweeping the area. Their advanced weapons hummed quietly, far superior to anything humans could hope to possess. The town itself appeared abandoned. A few scattered houses, a main street with a diner, and an old gas station stood eerily quiet, like relics of a forgotten era. Karamzar looked around, unimpressed. "Commander," Zivak called from a distance, "we've captured a few humans. They seem unremarkable." Karamzar strolled over to where a small group of human civilians had been corralled. He regarded them with thinly veiled disdain. One man, bleeding from a head wound, stared defiantly at the aliens despite the clear futility of the situation. "You're wasting your time," the man spat, his voice hoarse but unyielding. "You don't know what you're dealing with." Karamzar chuckled softly. "Is that so? Enlighten me." The human glared, his breath labored but his gaze unwavering. "We don't stop. No matter what you do, we won't quit." Karamzar's amusement turned to mild irritation. He glanced at Zivak, who was watching the exchange with bemusement. "You see, they're delusional. They think willpower can defeat superior force." "Shall we execute them, Commander?" Zivak asked casually, already preparing his weapon. "Not yet," Karamzar said, studying the human's face. "Let them watch. They'll understand soon enough." The soldiers began their advance into the town. A few scattered gunshots rang out, the humans' outdated firearms pathetically ineffective against the Dorkin armor. Karamzar's troops moved with ruthless efficiency, clearing buildings and securing the streets within minutes. The town fell silent, save for the hum of alien technology. As Karamzar surveyed the scene, a low rumble echoed in the distance. He turned, narrowing his eyes toward the horizon. In the distance, beyond the hills, a faint trail of dust rose into the air. "Commander," Zivak said, stepping beside him, "scanners are picking up movement. Multiple vehicles approaching from the south." Karamzar's lips curled into a sneer. Humans attempting a counterattack? Pathetic. The first vehicle, a battered civilian truck, appeared over the hill, followed by several more. Armed humans stood in the back, weapons drawn. They charged straight toward the alien line, outnumbered and outgunned. "They know they can't win," Zevok remarked, shaking his head. Why do they persist? Karamzor raised a hand, signaling his troops to hold fire for a moment. He wanted to see this display of desperation for himself. The trucks barreled closer, the humans' faces set in grim determination. They opened fire, bullets ricocheting harmlessly off the Dorkan armor. And yet, despite the futility of it, they pressed on, driving straight into the heart of the alien forces. A few moments later, the inevitable happened. The Dorkan soldiers returned fire, and within seconds, the human vehicles were reduced to smoldering wrecks. The battlefield fell silent once more. Karamzor exhaled slowly, shaking his head. See, Zevok? No challenge at all. But as he turned to leave, something nagged at him, a faint unease that he couldn't quite shake. These humans, why had they charged to their deaths, knowing they stood no chance? It was irrational, but there was something in their eyes, something in the way they fought that lingered in his mind. The commander brushed it off. The real battle would come soon enough. Secure the area, he ordered, and prepare for the next phase. But as Karamzor walked away, he couldn't help but glance back toward the wreckage, the defiant words of the human prisoner echoing in his mind. You don't know what you're dealing with. The night air was thick with tension as Commander Karamzor stared into the flickering holographic map before him. Red dots representing human forces were scattered across the terrain, insignificant in number but annoyingly persistent. They're like insects, Karamzor said, voice laced with frustration. You step on one and 10 more appear. Lieutenant Zevok stood at his side, equally perplexed. It's strange, Commander. We've faced resistance before, but nothing like this. They don't follow any discernible pattern. Every time we think we've cornered them, they slip away, only to strike somewhere else. Karamzor's jaw tightened as he studied the movements of the human forces. What had initially been small skirmishes, farmers and militia wielding outdated firearms, had now escalated into something more organized. Guerrilla strikes, hit-and-run tactics, and constant sabotage of supply lines were wearing down the Dorkan forces. What was more troubling was the precision of the attacks. The humans weren't just fighting. They were thinking, adapting faster than any species Karamzor had ever encountered. Who is leading them? Karamzor growled, his pride stung. This is not the work of a simple resistance. Someone with military training is behind this. Zevok's voice was tight with concern. Our intelligence suggests it's a former human military commander, name unknown. But they are keeping their operations highly decentralized. No direct engagement. They strike, then vanish. Cowards, Karamzor spat. They hide in the shadows because they know they cannot face us head-on. Just then, a junior officer approached, his face pale. Commander, we've lost contact with the Western outpost. What? Karamzor snapped, his patience wearing thin. How many humans were there? Scanners indicated fewer than a dozen, the officer replied, his voice faltering. But the outpost, it's gone, sir. They demolished it. Karamzor's fist clenched. How is that possible? A dozen humans cannot take down an entire outpost. They planted explosives, Commander, rigged the surrounding buildings, while our forces were distracted. It was surgical. A heavy silence followed as Karamzor absorbed the information. These humans were no longer just pests. They were calculating, methodical, and worst of all, they were effective. Double the patrols. I want scouts in every sector, Karamzor ordered, his voice a razor's edge. No more mistakes. Find these humans and end this. Zevok hesitated, his eyes betraying a sliver of doubt. Commander, we may need to reconsider our approach. These humans, they fight differently from what we've encountered before. Their unpredictability is becoming a serious threat. Karamzor rounded on him, his eyes blazing. Are you suggesting we cannot defeat them? No, sir, Zevok answered quickly, though his uncertainty remained. I'm saying we should adapt like they do. Every time we attack, they seem to know exactly where we'll be. It's almost as if they're one step ahead. For a moment, Karamzar considered his words. It was true. The humans seemed to anticipate their every move. But the thought of changing strategy because of these lowly creatures felt like an affront to the Dorkin way. Then we'll overwhelm them, Karamzar said, cold resolve hardening his voice. If they won't fight us face to face, we'll burn their hiding places to the ground. We'll make them suffer until they have no choice but to show themselves. Before Zivok could respond, a loud explosion rocked the camp. The ground trembled as alarms blared, and chaos erupted. Karamzar rushed to the observation window, his heart pounding. From the hills surrounding their base, bright flashes of gunfire and small detonations lit up the night. Impossible! Zivok shouted. They've breached the perimeter. Karamzar's eyes darted across the battlefield. Shadows moved swiftly through the dark, almost invisible. The humans were here, attacking in waves, slipping between defenses as though they knew every weak point. His soldiers, mighty and disciplined, faltered under the onslaught. It wasn't that the humans were stronger, far from it. They were smaller, weaker, and vastly outgunned. But their coordination, their timing, it was flawless. The humans struck from angles the Dorkin hadn't prepared for, using terrain and stealth in ways that defied logic. They're targeting our supply lines, Zivok observed grimly. Without fuel and ammunition, we'll be crippled. Karamzar's rage boiled over. Then crush them. They are nothing. But even as he barked the order, he could see the truth unfolding. This wasn't just a ragtag resistance. The humans were fighting with a purpose, a drive he hadn't expected. They were using their weaknesses as strengths, leveraging every inch of knowledge about the land, their surroundings, and, most terrifyingly, the Dorkin themselves. The commander watched in disbelief as his forces, the pride of the Dominion, struggled to contain the human fighters. Every time they thought they had gained ground, the humans slipped away, vanishing into the shadows, leaving destruction in their wake. We have underestimated them, Karamzar whispered, a cold knot of dread tightening in his chest. Zivok's silence was all the confirmation he needed. The night battle raged on, but the truth was now inescapable. These humans, once thought of as nothing more than fragile creatures of a backwater world, were proving themselves more formidable with every passing moment. They fought not just with weapons, but with their minds, their tenacity, their refusal to submit. Karamzar turned from the window, his eyes hard with a grim understanding. This is no longer a conquest, he said quietly. It's a war. The battlefield was a graveyard of alien wreckage and human sacrifice. Commander Karamzar stood at the center of the chaos, his polished armor scorched and battered. The once pristine ranks of his soldiers had been decimated, and the air hung heavy with the acrid stench of smoke and blood. All around him, the ground was littered with the fallen, Dorkin and human alike. "Commander, we must retreat," Zivok urged, his voice unsteady for the first time. His face, usually composed, now wore the deep lines of fear and fatigue. "Our forces are collapsing. The humans, they won't stop." Karamzar's eyes narrowed as he scanned the horizon. The humans hadn't just resisted. They had turned the tide of battle. What began as guerrilla tactics had evolved into a full-scale counteroffensive. And now, with every hour that passed, more of his soldiers fell to an enemy that should have been inferior in every way. "They're pressing in from all sides," Zivok continued, his voice shaking. "We're being outflanked." Karamzar could see it clearly now. The humans had not relied on strength or technology. They had outthought him, outmaneuvered him. Every time he adapted his tactics, they adapted faster, predicting his moves and countering them with a precision that defied explanation. The Dorkin had been the ones on the offensive, but now they were surrounded, trapped like prey. "Retreat is not an option," Karamzar said coldly, though even he could feel the desperation in his words. "We fight to the last." But even as he spoke, the sound of approaching vehicles and human war cries echoed from the ridges. The humans were closing in, their forces relentless, driven by something deeper than mere survival. The first wave of human fighters crested the hill, makeshift vehicles bristling with salvaged weaponry. Karamzar watched as a figure emerged from the lead truck, tall, weathered, and resolute. This was the human commander he had heard rumors about, the one orchestrating their resistance. The human commander locked eyes with Karamzar from across the battlefield, his face a mask of unshakable determination. In his hand, he carried nothing more than a simple rifle, primitive by Dorkin standards. Yet, in that moment, Karamzar understood. It wasn't the weapons that mattered. It wasn't even the tactics. It was the will. The human commander radiated a conviction that Karamzar had never seen before, a refusal to surrender, a belief that no matter the cost, humanity would stand. "They don't fear death," Karamzar murmured, his voice barely audible over the din of battle. It was a truth he had refused to acknowledge. But now, staring into the eyes of his enemy, he could no longer deny it. "That's their strength." Zivak looked at him in confusion. "Commander?" Karamzar turned his expression hard, but inside, something had shifted. The humans, they don't fight for conquest. They don't fight for dominance. They fight for each other, for something we can't understand. In the distance, the human commander raised his arm, signaling the charge. More vehicles roared forward, and human soldiers surged down the hill, their shouts filling the air. They knew they were outgunned. They knew they were outnumbered. And yet they charged without hesitation, because to them, this wasn't just a battle. It was survival. It was freedom. "They will never stop," Karamzar said, the weight of his own words settling heavily on his shoulders. "They fight for their home, for their species. That is why they are dangerous." Zivak stepped forward, his voice shaking with disbelief. "We should have retreated when we had the chance." Karamzar shook his head. It was too late for that now. He could see the truth in every human soldier's face, hear it in the roar of their engines, feel it in the thunder of their footsteps. The Dorkin had underestimated not their strength, but their spirit. And now, that spirit would be their undoing. The final clash was brutal, a maelstrom of fire and steel. Human forces descended upon the alien troops, their sheer will overpowering the technologically superior invaders. Karamzar fought with all the ferocity his species was known for, but with each passing moment, the battle became less about victory and more about survival. Amid the chaos, Karamzar found himself face to face with the human commander. They stood apart from the melee, locked in a moment of unspoken understanding. Karamzar's pulse thundered in his ears, and for the first time in his life, he felt something he had never known: fear. "You could have left," the human said, his voice low but clear. "But you chose to stay. Now, you see what we are." Karamzar tightened his grip on his weapon, but he knew the truth. Even if he won this fight, even if he killed this human, it would mean nothing. Humanity would keep coming. They would fight until there was nothing left of him, of the Dorkin, of anyone who threatened their home. With a roar of defiance, Karamzar lunged, but the human was faster. A swift strike knocked the weapon from his hand, and before he could react, Karamzar was on the ground, pinned beneath the human's boot. He struggled, but the fight was gone. The war was lost. Looking up into the human's eyes, Karamzar understood, at last. Strength wasn't in size or power. It wasn't in advanced weapons or superior numbers. It was in the heart, in the unwavering belief that some things were worth fighting for, worth dying for. And that was why humanity, fragile as they were, would never be defeated. As the battlefield around him fell quiet, Karamzar closed his eyes, the final revelation sinking in like a weight too heavy to bear.